Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, welcome back for another video. Today's video is all about answering questions that I had before going to Australia. So I love travelling, I'm always thinking about trips, even if they haven't been booked or aren't going to be booked for a while, but I am quite a worrier, so whenever I start thinking about or planning a trip, I always sort of get questions or what if scenarios in my head that sometimes then might delay the trip from happening. So I'm hoping this video might help soothe some of your worries or answer your questions if you've got any lingering worries about visiting Australia. So I first decided I wanted to travel in 2016 and I finally made it to Australia in 2023. So the worries and questions weren't the only thing that sort of delayed or made it such a long gap between wanted to travel and going. But as soon as sort of Australia piqued my interest, sort of some questions arose, and yeah, until I got the answer to them, that sort of was one of the things that made it such a long gap between deciding to travel and getting to Australia. So for a little bit of context, I went in May 2023 and started planning it in November 2022. I went with my cousin, she'd just finished uni, and we went for about 3 weeks, predominantly travelling up the East Coast. And we went solo, we organised it ourselves rather than doing it as part of a group. So yeah, that's kind of just a brief overview of our trip. So yeah, let's get into the questions. So question number one seems a bit of a silly question. So it was, what happens on a layover? So until I went to Australia, all my flights had been direct flights, and from the UK you cannot get a direct flight to Australia, so I knew we'd have to do a stopover. And I'd heard so many sort of stories about people who had missed their connecting flight, who had trouble at like customs getting through, and then having to re-pick up their baggage, check it back in, and yeah, that whole thing just sort of seemed a bit hectic and a bit so obviously I knew that I would have to have a layover on a flight to Australia. So our stopover was in Dubai, and it was such an easy process, and yeah, can't believe I got myself in such a state over this bit. So we got off the plane, and rather than following the signs for customs, we followed the sign for connecting flights. At Dubai airport, I think the signs were pink, and yeah, so that led us to sort of another departure area. We did have to go through security again, but at this point we didn't have to get rid of any liquids or anything. We were able to take them through, and then once we'd got through that part of security, we then went into the departure lounges and sort of waited for our gate to come up. So we just sort of bunked ourselves down on a seat and sort of went and freshened up in the toilet, changed clothes, cleaned teeth, and then just sort of reorganised our hand luggage to get it ready for the next flight. We had about a 2.5 hour layover, so by the time we'd done all that, we just sort of had an hour before we had to board the flight. And so we just sat down, chilled, played on our phones a little bit. Yeah, we didn't really look around any of the shops or anything, but you could do that. And then it was time to go to our gate, and this is where we had to go through security again, and we had to get rid of any liquids. And then at this point, me and my cousin got separated, so for some reason I just breezed through security. I didn't have to do anything, but she had to go into a different queue and be sort of full body scanned, had her bag emptied out. And I'm not sure what made her flag up and not me. And maybe it was just like every number passenger, like sort of every fifth passenger. I don't know. But yeah, so this time security was a lot more strict. And then we went into the departure gate, and then just before we got on the plane again, we were searched again. So and this time we had to take off shoes, bags, coats, had bags searched, and yeah, this actually delayed us a lot, and made the plane late. So yeah, I'm not sure why they had two lots of security within sort of 100 yards of each other, one at the entrance to the departure gate and then one at the entrance to the plane. But overall, the layover experience was really smooth. Didn't have to go through customs or like deal with visas or anything. Didn't have to pick up luggage, didn't have to recheck it in, and we were given our boarding passes for both flights at Gatwick when we initially checked in. So yeah, that was really smooth. I know that doesn't apply in every country. I think in America, if you've got a connecting flight, you do have to go through customs, pick your luggage up and recheck it in. So we had a layover of about 2.5 hours. So if I was going to America, like a connecting flight in America, I would definitely leave a lot longer for the layover, because American customs can be hit or miss. So yeah, this is just applying to flying or connecting in Dubai. I think Singapore is the same as well, which is another common stopover place en route to Australia. So overall, the layover experience should be pretty smooth. And then leading on from that, my next question I had was, how long was the flight, or how long would the flight be? So overall, it was about 24 hours. It was, two flights. So our first one was from London to Dubai, which was about 7.5 hours. Then we had the layover, which was 2.5 hours. And then we had a 14-hour flight from Dubai to Melbourne. So yeah, overall, it was about 24 hours. And then because Melbourne wasn't actually our final destination, our final destination was Uluru, or Ayers Rock, in the middle of the country. We then had another 3-hour flight from Melbourne to there. So yeah, it was a long flight, but 100% worth it. It didn't go too slowly. I'm a person who I'm happy to sit on a flight for 13 hours and watch films and sleep, so I don't get bored too easily. But I know that for some people that would be a struggle, but it is definitely 100% worth the flight to go to Australia. So once I've decided, yep, I want to go, the next question I had was, where do you start? So obviously Australia is a massive country, and so in order to decide what we wanted to do and the places we wanted to see, my cousin and I made a list of places we wanted to go to ensure that we went to see those bits. So top of her list was Australia Zoo, Byron Bay and Sydney. She really wanted to go to those 3 places. And then top of my list was Ayers Rock, Sydney, so that matched up, and the Great Barrier Reef. So we thought it made sense to fly into the middle first and then fly back to one of the cities, either Sydney or Cairns, and make our way up or down the coast. So yeah, we managed to book our Ayers Rock stuff first, and then it was deciding whether it would be better to fly to Cairns in the top of the country and make our way down, or to fly to Sydney and make our way up. So we eventually decided to start in Cairns and come down. However, because of the availability of flights from Ayers Rock, we actually ended up flying from Ayers Rock back to Melbourne and then a flight up to Cairns, which sounds a lot, and it was. It was actually cheaper that way than to fly to Cairns and come down the coast, or to fly back to Melbourne, get to Sydney, and then fly home from Cairns. So yeah, we had to do a bit of budget working out, and the route that we did it because it was the cheapest. And then next question I had was, when do we go? So with this one, we were quite restricted on timings of when we could go in the year. So we ended up going in what would be the autumn / start of winter in Australia. And the reason we did this was because my cousin didn't finish uni until the beginning of May, and she was hoping to get a job that started in September. So we were restricted to 3 months. And so we decided probably better to go at the start of winter rather than leave it until August and going in midwinter. So that was the reason we decided to go at the end of May. I would highly recommend going in what is the start of winter in the southern hemisphere. I did sort of have worries that it would be a bit like winter in the UK, and it absolutely isn't. So we were there for 18 days and we only had rain on 2 or 3 of them. And fortunately, the days it did rain actually suited us because we were either doing a lot of hiking, and so see, we weren't hiking in the sun, which was nice. And the other day it poured with rain is the day we went to Australia Zoo, and our guide said that actually the animals like the rain. That's what makes them come out more, rather than when it's blistering hot sun where they hide in the shade and you don't actually get to see them. So the rain actually helped us and gave us a better experience. But overall, going in May, we had sunshine. It was warm temperatures but not too hot. So yeah, don't be put off going in winter, even though sort of you wouldn't associate sun and winter together, but in Australia it works. Okay, the next question I thought about was, how long should I go for? So this was because as much as I love travel, I don't like being away from home too long. 2 weeks is the longest time I'd been away from home before. 1, because I'm such a home bird, but 2, I'm self-employed, and so obviously the longer I'm away from work, the more money I lose. So I wanted to get that balance between making sure that we're not away for too long, but then obviously we need to make it worthwhile going to Australia. So going for a week was never gonna work, because to go that far for a week, is a bit daft, but also there was so much we wanted to see that we wouldn't get it done in a week. So we opted to go we were away for 21 days in total, but 3 of those days ended up being the flights. So yeah, it was essentially 1 day completely taken up by the flight, getting there, 1 day coming home, and then there was 1 day in the middle where we had to get a flight from Ayers Rock to Melbourne and up to Cairns, so that sort of took away a whole day as well. So yeah, 18 days in total in the country, and we managed to do a lot. I'll link in the description box our itinerary that we did, so you'll be able to see which days we did what we did on each day. Next question is it expensive? In a word, yes, but it wasn't so expensive that it sort of made me internally scream. The most expensive parts were the day trips, but I would say that they are worth their money. So, for example, our trip to the Great Barrier Reef, it was about 250 Australian dollars, which was about £170. I'll try and put the conversion rate up on the screen. So, but that was a 10-hour day, and it included all lunch, all snacks, food, drink, and the only thing it didn't include was transfers from our hostel to the marina to pick up the boat. So yes, the day tours are expensive, but you do get very well looked after and everything is pretty much included. I didn't find the hostels too expensive. The cities are more expensive than kind of the beach towns, which I'll go more into hostels in a second. And food was fairly expensive, but there were cheap ways that you could eat as well. So overall it is expensive. So on a 3-week, because the next question I've got is how much will it cost? So on a 3-week trip, including everything except spending money, it cost £3,900. So that is expensive. There are ways you can do it cheaper, and the thing that bumped up our price was the 3 days we spent at Ayers Rock, and those 3 days itself was £900 So had we not done that, £3,000 for 3 weeks, you know, seems a lot more manageable. However, I would 100% recommend going to Ayers Rock and would have no worries in spending that £900 to revisit it. So yes, it is an expensive country, but for what you get and the experiences you have, it is well worth the visit. Okay, so just like I touched on recently, the next question was, what are hostels like? Because I'd heard some horror stories about hostels, you know, that they were dirty and, you know, just a bit manky. However, all but one of the hostels we stayed in were amazing, and I would have no qualms in staying in them again. So we stayed in a total of Cairns, Airlie Beach, I've forgotten where else we went, Brisbane, Rainbow Beach, Byron Bay and Sydney. So we stayed in 6 different hostels, and only one of them was a bit dodgy, and that was our hostel in Cairns, which was called the Jack Backpackers Hostel. So it's not that I wouldn't recommend it. The reason we stayed there is because most people stay at a place called Gilligan's, which is known for being the party hostel, but it was also very expensive when I looked, whereas this one was a lot cheaper, and now we know why. So I'll pop up a little picture of our private room. So in all but one of the hostels, we stayed in private rooms because that actually worked out cheaper than getting 2 single beds in a dorm room. And the only place that didn't work out cheaper was Sydney, but I'll come on to that one in a minute. So yeah, the hostel we stayed in Cairns, our private room was like a prison cell. It was so small. We had bunk beds, which again, I don't mind. Not fussed about bunk beds. It's just the fact that they looked like they were going to fall down at the slightest movement. And it was a shared communal bathroom, so it wasn't like a shared ensuite or an ensuite or anything. It was like shower blocks, which were a bit mank, but we were only there for 3 nights, so it was manageable. But yeah, it wasn't the best hostel. They took a $30 key deposit at the time of check-in, and that's to make sure that you don't run off with the hostel keys. And we gave both our hostel keys back in, and they never refunded me my $30. And when I emailed to chase that up, I never got a response. So yeah, just little things. The kitchen wasn't very clean for cooking. So yeah, I would avoid the Jack Backpackers in Cairns, and if you can get into Gilligan's, stay there. I'm sure there must be other hostels in Cairns, but didn't get that far into research. So yeah, that was the only sort of dodgy hostel we stayed in. The best hostel, my favourite one that we stayed in, was Rainbow Beach. We had a private room with ensuite. It had a fridge, it had a massive double bed, and then it had like a little terrace area and a pool right outside our room. And yeah, that was amazing. Although the kitchen in that one, because it's outside, there were lots of bugs, and it was a bit it was like a gas-fired hob, which looked like it could explode any second. But the rest of the hostel was amazing. So yeah, they're very clean, they're quite inexpensive. I think because we went technically off season, they were a little bit cheaper than if you go in the summertime over there. But overall, the hostels were brilliant, and I wouldn't have any qualms staying in a hostel in Australia again. So the next question was spiders and snakes, because obviously Australia is notorious for having deadly spiders and snakes, and throughout the whole 3 weeks we didn't see a single one, apart from in the jungle in Cairns. We saw a tiny little spider crawling on the ground, but it had a little red line going down its back, and we thought maybe we'll give that one a wide berth. But apart from that, we didn't see any, at all. I was expecting to sort of see big gigantic ones, but yeah, it was a tiny little one we saw. It was on the ground. We left it alone. Didn't see any snakes. our guide on our tour to Fraser Island had said that he'd seen a carpet python, and he took us to the spot where he'd seen it a couple of days before, but it had gone. So yeah, no, unless you actively go looking for them, I think the chances of seeing them are rare. Don't quote me on that. It could be, you know, someone else might have a different story where they did see spiders. My biggest worry about wildlife in Australia was seeing a toad, because I hate frogs and toads. I can't stand them. So yeah, give me a snake or a spider any day, but a frog, no. Obviously Australia is known for the cane toad, but again, thank goodness, didn't see one at all. So yeah, the only real wildlife we saw were dingoes, and that was on Fraser Island, and that was the only place that we saw them. So the hostels in the cities, I know, spray everywhere to stop insects coming in. So yeah, don't let spiders and snakes sort of deter you from going, because the chances of seeing them are very slim. And then next question I had was how to get around. So we decided not to hire a car just because of cost, really. I think it was going to add up, and also the distances between places are huge, and we didn't want to, because we knew we'd have to be quite quick in each place, we didn't want to sort of spend loads of time driving to just spend a couple of hours in a place. So instead we used the Greyhound bus service, which was really good. I'd highly recommend it. So you pick your direction of travel, whether you're going northbound or southbound, and then you pick for how many days pass you need. So we went for a 15-day pass, even though we were only traveling 8 days, 8 consecutive days, if that makes it. So we only needed the pass for 8 days, but they only do 7-day or 15 or 30-day passes. So we went for the 15-day pass, and you book your seat online, you choose the seat you want on the coach that you want, and yeah, you just rock up at the coach stop, you put your bag underneath the coach, and then you take your hand luggage on with you. We did have mixed experience with drivers. Most of them were lovely, and even though online it does say one bag in the hold and one bag on the coach with you, most of them did let you take more on. Like we had like our backpacks, but then also a bag of food, but then we did have one driver who was so strict on the luggage, and he wouldn't let us bring food on the coach. I mean, they do stipulate that you don't bring hot food, which I think that's fair enough, because obviously the smell can go around the coach, but you're allowed to bring cold food, sandwiches, that sort of thing. But yeah, this one driver, he took my brioche rolls off me, and I'm still not entirely sure why. So yeah, it all depends on the driver you get, but most of them are lovely. If it's a long journey, so we had one daytime journey that was 10 hours, and then we had 2 overnight buses which were 13 hours each, or 11 to 13 hours. It was sort of, one was 11, one was 13 hours, and they stop every 3.5 to 4 hours. For about half an hour they'll stop at a petrol station where there's toilets, washrooms, places to get food, snacks, drinks, and then they tell you the time you've got to be back on the coach. You get back on the coach and you drive off again for another 3.5 to 4 hours. So the buses are long and they are boring, but it's, you know, it's a way to get around, and it is probably the simplest, easiest way to get between places. And then finally, the last question I had was sort of, is there anything that's sort of overhyped? Because obviously when you go to Australia, you go and see the Great Barrier Reef, you go and see Fraser Island, you go and see the Whitsundays, you go and see Byron Bay, and the only thing that I would have said was, not that it was overhyped, but our trip to the Whitsundays, we only did it as a day tour because that's what fit into our schedule, and would have been nice to spend just a little bit longer there. I felt it was very rushed, which makes sense because there's lots of islands there, and so they've got to cherry pick the best bits and get you round to them all. So yeah, that was kind of one of the only places that I thought was overhyped. The other one, and I feel really bad saying this, was Brisbane. I think maybe because our hostel was a little bit out of the way of the centre of the city, and we were only there for one full day. We had an afternoon, the full day, and then the morning of the next day, and that full day we spent at Australia Zoo rather than exploring the city. So for what we saw, yeah, I wasn't impressed with Brisbane, which I feel really bad at because I wanted to like everywhere. But yeah, it's not that I didn't like it, it just wasn't my favourite place. So yeah, those are all sort of, I'm sure I had more when I started booking this, but those were sort of the main questions that I had. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, if you're looking to go to Australia, leave them in the description box, and either hopefully I'll be able to answer them or another viewer might be able to. If you've got any tips or tricks that if you've been to Australia that you think someone else might find useful, again, leave a comment in the description, leave a comment in the comment box. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.